You sit before me now with a quiet heaviness in your chest, as if your heart has been walking for many years toward a horizon that never arrives. And the moment you step into this room, you feel as though the burden knows it is finally allowed to rest. This is the sacred moment in which the empathic woman, after a lifetime of searching outside herself, begins to sense the faint outline of a revelation waiting to unfold from within. And I tell you gently, with the patience of an old friend who has walked through many chambers of the unconscious, that the day an empath stops chasing love is not a day of collapse or defeat. It is the day the axis of her entire inner cosmos turns. Almost imperceptibly at first, but unmistakably, like the earth shifting its poles by a single decisive degree. You have spent years believing that love exists somewhere outside you, carried by figures who appear in your life like wandering archetypes, some luminous, some wounded, some deceptive, some merely lost. You saw them as mirrors, portals, lessons, or even salvations. What you did not realize is that you were also projecting the forgotten fragments of your own self onto these figures, believing that the pursuit of them would resolve the ancient tension that lives beneath your ribs. When an empath chases love, she chases an echo of her own abandoned reflection. She runs toward others with the same devotion that her inner child once used to run toward a distant door, hoping someone would finally open it and say, "I see you, I choose you, you are safe here, I now." But today, as you breathe slowly, you begin to understand a truth older than any memory. The pursuit of love creates a paradox. The harder the empath runs towards someone, the more she moves away from the magnetic center of her own being. And life, seeing this dislocation, continues to send her figures who cannot stay, who cannot match her depth, who cannot hold the vast emotional landscapes she carries, not because she is unworthy, but because she is not anchored in herself. The psyche refuses to grant stable love to a person who is not fully present within their own soul. When you chase love, you chase an archetype dressed in temporary human form, and archetypes, as you know, cannot be held by the hands. They must be integrated, not pursued. Feel this with me for a moment. The empathic woman often confuses relational longing with destiny. She feels the world through the porous boundary of her heart. She absorbs what others fear to feel. She anticipates emotional shifts before they surface. She interprets silence as text and tension as prophecy. She senses the ghosts that live inside the people she cares for, and she mistakes the illumination she brings to their darkness for evidence that they are the ones meant for her. Yet all this time, she has ignored a deeper call, the signal from the self, rising like a tide from the unconscious, urging her to withdraw her energy, to gather her projections, to stop scattering her essence across the deserts of unreciprocated devotion. The day she stops chasing love is the day she hears that call clearly. It is the day her psyche says, "Return." Listen to this word, return. It is not a command to shrink or to hide. It is an invitation to reclaim the sacred territory of your inner world. Many empathic women experience a powerful dream around the time of this shift. Perhaps you have had a dream like this. You are walking through a forest at dusk, searching for someone or something that keeps moving just beyond your reach. You catch glimpses, footsteps, a silhouette, a whisper, but never the full figure. The branches grow denser, the path becomes narrow, and then, at the moment you are about to lose yourself entirely, you stop. In the dream, the stillness feels like surrender, but not the hopeless kind. It is the surrender of someone who realizes that the forest itself has been trying to speak. The moment you stop, the figure you were chasing dissolves into the trees, as though it was never meant to be caught. Instead, the forest around you grows brighter, more alive, and from behind you, from the direction you never expected, comes a presence that feels like recognition. You turn slowly, and a doorway appears where there was none. A doorway not toward the outer world, but toward an inner chamber you had forgotten existed. This dream is not merely symbolic, it is prophetic. It reflects the moment when the empath stops externalizing the search for love, when she stops believing that fulfillment lies in another's arms, when she finally sees that the person she was chasing was an aspect of her own soul running ahead, urging her back toward herself. Archetypically, this is the shift from the lover to the self. It is the turning inward that transforms a woman from a seeker of affection into a creator of it. The reversal does not happen in the world first. It happens in the psyche. And when the psyche changes direction, life inevitably follows. The empath woman, throughout much of her life, has been conditioned to be the healer, the soft place for others to land, the intuitive mirror, the emotional anchor. She has learned to read the unspoken language of suffering. She brings warmth to coldness, stability to chaos, clarity to confusion. She sees the best in people not because she is naive, but because she recognizes the subtle glow of their potential. She has lived in the symbolic realm since childhood, even if she did not have the language for it. But here is the tragedy. She walks through the world offering emotional containment to others while receiving almost none in return. She becomes a vessel into which others pour their fears, their wounds, their unmet longings. She becomes the safe harbor for the storms of others. She becomes the archetypal healer, but she forgets to heal herself. And so she begins to believe that love must be earned. She begins to associate love with sacrifice. She sees attachment as something fragile that must be kept alive by constant tending. She internalizes the belief that love, if not pursued, will disappear. Yet the unconscious does not tolerate this illusion forever. At some point, perhaps quietly, perhaps through a painful rupture, something within her breaks the spell. A realization dawns that love, which must be chased, will never be embodied. Love that asks her to run is love that cannot stand on its own legs. A woman who has spent her life chasing love inevitably reaches the threshold where she awakens to the truth that love must meet her, not flee from her. Everything reverses the moment she stops. When she withdraws her projections, she returns her power to the self. When she chooses to no longer explain her worth, no longer justify her depth, no longer shrink her emotional intelligence to keep someone comfortable, the polarity changes. What once repelled her becomes magnetized toward her. What once ignored her begins to notice her. What once took her for granted begins to sense the gravity of her absence, not because she plays a game, but because she exits the dysfunctional field she once participated in unconsciously. It is a psychological law. The one who is anchored becomes the center of the field, and the empath woman, once she reclaims her energy, becomes a gravitational force without effort. This is why the reversal feels almost mystical. It is not merely relational, it is alchemical. It is as though the universe shifts its gaze back to her. Opportunities open. People respond differently. Love arrives not as something she must negotiate for, but as something drawn to her equilibrium. The unconscious has been waiting for her to see that she is the source, not the seeker. And as you sit here, perhaps a quiet understanding rises in your chest, a recognition that you have been living too long with your energy turned outward, waiting for someone to validate the depth you already contain. Perhaps you begin to sense that your longing has been a mirror, not a map. In this moment, I want you to feel the ancient stillness that emerges when a woman stops chasing. It is not the stillness of emptiness. It is the stillness of a lake whose waters finally reflect the moon in perfect clarity. When an empath stops running toward love, she stops abandoning herself in the process. She stops being the echo and becomes the voice. She stops being the seeker and becomes the threshold. She stops being the longing and becomes the presence. And in that presence, everything reverses. Not because the world has changed, but because she has. And now, as you sit with the quiet truth that has begun to rise inside you, feel how the air around us shifts in subtle currents, as though the room itself has been waiting for you to reach this threshold. When an empath stops chasing love, there is a palpable rearrangement in the psychic field. It is as if the unconscious, long burdened by the tension of projection, exhales. You may not have words for this yet, but your body recognizes it. Your breath slows, your chest softens. Something inside you whispers that you are entering a realm where the rules you once lived by no longer apply. For so long, you have related to love as a kind of exile. You believed that you must travel outward into the world, offering your tenderness like a lantern held before wandering figures who did not know how to hold the light you carried. You gave pieces of yourself as though love were a currency and you were trying to purchase belonging. You wrapped others in warmth so they could feel what you wished someone would feel for you. You mistook your capacity to heal for proof that someone was meant to stay. You believed that if you just loved with enough devotion, enough purity, enough sacrifice, the one you longed for would finally awaken. But you see now that this longing was never truly about another person. It was the psyche calling you back, guiding you through the labyrinth of your own patterns until you finally recognized the Minotaur at the center was not a monster, but a wounded child waiting for you to return. When you chased love, you were not seeking a partner. You were seeking the lost mirror of your own self-worth. And so, today, I want you to feel the gravity of this moment. When an empath stops chasing, she does not merely shift her behavior, she reclaims her myth. You have lived for years inside the archetype of the wounded healer. You believed your love was strongest when it was pouring into someone who was unable to receive it. You were drawn to the broken because a part of you believed that if you could repair someone else's heart, your own would finally be acknowledged. This is the secret wound of the empath. She believes she must prove her value through emotional labor. But as you awaken, this wound loosens its hold. You begin to see that love is not an act of rescue. It is not an act of self-erasure. It is not the merging of two unfinished souls hoping to become whole by clinging to each other. Love, true love, is a meeting of two individuals who already stand in their own fullness. As you stop chasing, you begin to feel the contours of your own being again. You feel the lost edges returning. You feel your energy folding back into your body like wings, returning to the form they were always meant to support. And with this return comes a strange sensation, almost like grief. But deeper, this is the mourning of the self-abandonment you once normalized. It is the grief of realizing how many times you silenced your intuition to preserve the illusion of connection. How many moments you pretended not to notice imbalances. How many nights you reassured yourself that crumbs of affection were signs of potential. How deeply you convinced yourself that love was something you had to earn by being endlessly patient, endlessly gentle, endlessly understanding. The empath's greatest illusion is that love is achieved through endurance, but endurance is not love. It is self-betrayal disguised as devotion. Take a breath with me, slowly, and allow this truth to settle. When you stop chasing, the unconscious reveals what had been buried. Your longing was never for another person. It was for yourself, your unclaimed voice, your forgotten intuition, your buried joy, your unexpressed anger, your sacred sense of deserving. Let me tell you a dream that visits many empathic women around this stage of awakening. In this dream, you are carrying a bowl of water in your hands, walking through a village filled with strangers. Each time someone passes, they dip their hands into the bowl, taking water from you. Some take eagerly, some without noticing, some with gratitude, some with indifference. You continue offering the water because you believe it is your purpose. You believe this is how you will connect. But then you notice the bowl becoming lighter. You look down and see only a shallow shimmer of water left. For the first time in the dream, you are afraid. But something shifts. You stop walking. You cup your hands around the little water that remains. And the moment you do, the bowl begins to refill, not from the sky, not from the village, but from within the bowl itself, as if its source was never external. You realize you had been carrying a sacred well, but it needed your hands to stop moving so it could replenish. This is the psyche speaking to you in symbols. You were never meant to be emptied to keep others full. Your essence regenerates only when it is honored, not when it is scattered. And so the reversal, the mysterious turning point begins the moment you hold your own bowl with reverence. People feel this, even if they cannot name it. They sense the shift. The empath, who once extended her heart toward everyone, now becomes a figure of quiet depth. Her silence becomes magnetic. Her presence becomes unmistakably sovereign. It is not pride. It is not guardedness. It is simply the energy of a woman who has stopped abandoning herself. This is why everything reverses. Because you are no longer reaching outward. Your energy becomes centered. Because you are no longer shrinking to fit someone else's story. Your presence expands because you are no longer performing emotional contortions to be chosen. You begin choosing yourself, and when you choose yourself, the world reorganizes around you. This phenomenon is often misunderstood. Some call it fate, some call it divine timing, some call it inner mastery. But psychologically, what is happening is that your center of gravity has shifted. You are no longer an orbiting body. You become the sun, and every relational dynamic now responds to your internal alignment. Those who once overlooked you now feel the weight of your absence. Those who once took you for granted now feel the emptiness where your energy once lived. Those who once relied on you to carry the emotional load suddenly confront their own shadows without your buffering presence. Some retreat, some awaken, some attempt to return, but none remain unaffected. Yet, the most profound change is not external, it is the silence that forms inside you. This silence is not emptiness, it is spaciousness. It is the room your psyche builds when you stop cluttering your inner temple with the expectations, wounds, and projections of others. It is the silence of someone who has stopped trying to earn what she already contains. It is the silence of someone who has discovered that love is not a chase, but a reflection. Feel how your body responds to these words. Something softens, yes, but something also strengthens. There is a new posture forming in your spirit, a posture of someone who no longer walks with her head lowered, scanning the horizon for signs of love. You begin to walk differently, not outward but inward, not seeking but allowing. And in this allowing, life shifts. This is the paradox of energy. That which is chased flees. That which is embodied attracts. The empath woman who stops chasing becomes the embodiment of her own longing. Her presence becomes a sanctuary. Her voice becomes a boundary. Her intuition becomes a compass. Her heart becomes a hearth where love is not pursued but welcomed. And she begins to understand, perhaps for the first time in her life, that she was never meant to run toward love. She was meant to stand still long enough for love to recognize her. This is the reversal. This is the turning of the tide. This is the day the empath woman remembers who she is. As the silence inside you expands, Something extraordinary begins to rise from its depths, an awareness that feels less like a new insight and more like the remembering of a forgotten truth. It is as though the soul has been waiting patiently for you to reach this point, to stop scattering your energy across distant emotional landscapes, to stop bending toward those who cannot meet you, to stop running toward the promise of love as if love were a distant horizon. And now, in this stillness, you finally hear the voice that was always there, faint but unwavering, speaking from beneath every longing you have ever felt. It tells you that you were never meant to chase anything. You were meant to become. Becoming is a strange sensation, especially for the empathic woman who has lived so long in relation to others. For so many years, your identity was shaped in response to those around you feeling their sorrow, anticipating their needs, translating their silence, absorbing their emotional storms. Your empathic nature was a gift, but it also became a mask. You learned to shape-shift into whatever others needed in order to maintain connection. You believed that if you were flexible enough, intuitive enough, patient enough, someone would eventually stay. Someone would finally recognize the depth you carried. Someone would see the ancient forest inside you and choose to wander it with reverence. But now, as you stop chasing, the mask dissolves. The shape-shifting ends. The empath who once flowed outward now flows inward. And this inward flow awakens something fierce, something holy, something that feels like a birth. It is the emergence of your own center, the part of you that does not bend to maintain belonging, the part that refuses to be diluted, the part that knows its worth without reference to anyone else. And in this moment, a transformation begins, slow, steady, irreversible. It is the transformation from resonance to sovereignty. For most of your life, you have lived in resonance. You tuned yourself to the emotional frequencies of others, like a finely crafted instrument that could vibrate with every passing note. You felt the cracks in someone's voice and sensed the fractures in their spirit. You recognized their loneliness before they named it. You loved people as they could be, not as they were. You entered their shadows with a lantern, believing that if you illuminated their darkness, it would somehow light your own path as well. But resonance without sovereignty is a trap. It keeps you attuned to others but estranged from yourself. It gives you the illusion of connection while draining you of your essence. It binds you to wounded archetypes, those who take but cannot give, those who cling but cannot hold, those who awaken your compassion but not your reciprocity. The day you stop chasing love is the day you shift from resonance to sovereignty. Sovereignty is not hardness. It is not withdrawal. It is not emotional distance. Sovereignty is the quiet recognition that your life is your own, that your energy is sacred, that your love is not a currency to be traded for scraps of affection. It is the realization that you are the keeper of the temple, not the wandering pilgrim searching for somewhere to kneel. In this shift, something profound happens. The people who once consumed your energy no longer have access to it. The relationships built on imbalance dissolve. The patterns that once held you captive lose their power, the part of you that sought validation through service, through sacrifice, through emotional labor begins to soften and fade. You start to see that not everyone who enters your life deserves a seat at the table of your attention. And then the dreams begin to change. Perhaps you have noticed this already. In your dreams, you are no longer running. You are no longer searching. You are no longer calling out to someone who disappears around a corner or fades into fog. Instead, you stand still, and the landscape around you rearranges itself. Doors open on their own. Figures approach with gentleness instead of urgency. You walk through forests where the trees part for you, where the path reveals itself not through pursuit but through presence. This shift in your dream world signals a shift in your psyche. You are reclaiming the archetype of the self, the radiant center of your internal universe. The self does not chase. The self does not plead. The self does not enter the labyrinth hoping someone else will lead the way. The self stands at the center and lets the labyrinth reveal its map. When the empath woman enters this stage, something magnetic awakens within her. She becomes a threshold, a portal through which others must pass with intention, not entitlement. Her energy no longer spills outward uncontrollably. It moves with precision. Her intuition sharpens. Her boundaries strengthen not through force but through clarity. She no longer fears being alone because solitude becomes a sanctuary rather than a void. And as this inner magnetism awakens, the world responds. People begin to notice her in ways they never did before. Not because she becomes louder, not because she becomes colder, not because she becomes more distant, but because her presence now carries weight. She is no longer an echo. She is a voice. She is no longer the one who pursues. She is the one toward whom others gravitate. This reversal is not manipulation. It is not a tactic. It is the natural response of the world to someone who has integrated their own self-worth. The empath who stops chasing love becomes the embodiment of the love she once sought. And this embodiment creates a field around her, a silent, powerful field that draws in what resonates with her truth and repels what cannot match her frequency. She no longer attracts the emotionally unavailable, for she no longer vibrates with the energy of abandonment. She no longer tolerates half-hearted affection, for she no longer sees scarcity as normal. She no longer finds herself entangled with those who drain her, for she now knows how to protect her inner well. As this new energy settles within you, you may feel an unfamiliar sensation rising in your chest. It is not pride, it is not arrogance, it is a rediscovery of your own dignity. Dignity is the soul standing upright. It is the moment you stop apologizing for your depth. It is the moment you stop shrinking to make others comfortable. It is the moment you realize that your sensitivity is not a liability but a form of intelligence. It is the moment you understand that your intuition has been guiding you toward yourself all along. And in this rediscovered dignity, you begin to love differently. You no longer love from longing. You love from fullness. You no longer offer your heart as a remedy. you offer it as a meeting place. You no longer accept love that wounds. You recognize that love which wounds is not love at all. You no longer ask, will someone choose me? You begin to ask, does this connection honor my truth? This is the empath woman's spiritual inversion, the great turning, the reclaiming of the self. And when you reach this place, the past begins to release you. The old bonds loosen, the old patterns dissolve. The cycles that once repeated themselves endlessly now break like waves against the shore of your new awareness. You feel a rising within you, quiet, steady, ancient, telling you that you have crossed a threshold from which there is no return. You are no longer the woman who waits for someone to awaken her worth. You are the woman who awakens her own soul and stands in the radiance of that awakening. And this radiance, it changes everything. And now, as you feel the radiance rising quietly within you, something even deeper begins to stir. It is not a surge of emotion, nor a sudden revelation, but a slow unfurling, like the petals of a flower opening in darkness long before dawn touches the horizon. This is the stage of transformation where the empathic woman steps out of the old architecture of her identity and begins to inhabit a new inner landscape, a landscape shaped not by longing but by remembrance, not by pursuit but by presence, not by wounds but by wisdom. You may notice that your body feels different now. Your breath settles into a rhythm that no longer strains to anticipate the moods of others. Your shoulders loosen from the weight of carrying emotions that were never yours to hold. Your heart, once stretched thin across the wide terrain of other people's needs, now gathers itself inward, pulsing with a slow, deliberate strength. This is the sensation of returning to your own center. And once you have felt this return, you can never again convince yourself that your worth depends on being consumed by the needs of another. There is a moment in every empath's life, a moment like a quiet thunder that signals the end of the old cycle. It may arrive through heartbreak, or through fatigue, or through a sudden clarity that rises like a flare from the unconscious. It may come in a dream, or in a silence, or in a gaze you suddenly realize no longer reaches you. But whenever it comes, it has the same effect. It breaks the spell of pursuit. It dissolves the illusion that love must be chased, earned, explained, or proven. And when that spell dissolves, the world appears different, not because it has changed, but because you are finally seeing it through your own eyes. For the empathic woman, this shift often feels like waking from a long dream. You look back on the patterns that once entangled you and realize they were never reflections of your inadequacy. They were reflections of your projections. You were giving the world a map of wounds it did not know how to read. And in doing so, you attracted people who mirrored your unconscious beliefs about love. You chose those who could not choose you because you had not yet chosen yourself. But now you have, and the moment you choose yourself, not in theory, not as affirmation, but as lived reality, everything reverses. Your intuition becomes sharper, no longer clouded by desire. Your boundaries become natural, not forced. Your decisions become rooted, not reactive. You stop justifying your needs as if they were burdens. You stop apologizing for your depth as if it were an inconvenience. You stop explaining yourself endlessly to those committed to misunderstanding you. Something ancient awakens in you, the archetype of the sovereign feminine. She moves quietly, but the world feels her presence. She does not chase, because she recognizes that love is not a destination but a mirror. She does not plead, because she knows that any connection requiring her to shrink is not a connection but a prison. She does not endure emotional starvation, because she finally understands that starvation is not proof of devotion, it is proof of misalignment. In this awakening, the empath woman stops being a vessel for other people's shadows. She becomes the keeper of her own light. And this light does not demand, it reveals. It reveals who is capable of meeting her. It reveals who is ready to grow. It reveals who has merely been attracted to her softness without being prepared for her strength. For the first time, you see the difference, and with this clarity, something miraculous begins to happen. Without effort, without strategy, without performing or contorting yourself, life begins to respond to your new energy. Opportunities appear where previously there were closed doors. People approach you with sincerity rather than need. Love begins to move toward you instead of away from you. Not because you have become someone else, but because you have finally become yourself. The reversal is not magic, it is alignment. There is a moment, perhaps even now, where you feel a strange sensation deep in your chest, a kind of soft power, a quiet certainty, as though something inside you has finally taken its rightful place. This is the integration of the self. It is what every empath unconsciously seeks, but few attain until they stop scattering their essence across people who cannot hold it. When you integrate the self, you no longer fall in love with potential. You fall in love with reality. You no longer chase the emotionally unavailable. You recognize them as reflections of an old wound you no longer carry. You no longer crave intensity that burns but does not warm. You seek presence, not passion, that consumes, but presence that anchors. And because your energy is no longer leaking towards the horizon of longing, it begins to grow. It expands outward like a field, subtle but unmistakable. Others feel it before they understand it. Some will be drawn to you with a reverence they cannot explain. Some will retreat, sensing instinctively that they can no longer feed on your openness without offering anything in return. Some will try to re-enter your life, hoping the old dynamic still exists, only to find that the door to your inner world is no longer unlocked by their pain. Your soul has changed its architecture. Your heart has changed its language. Your presence has changed its gravity. You have become the thing you once pursued. And now, love becomes a byproduct of your alignment, not a quest, not a negotiation, not a hunt through the emotional wilderness. You may find yourself smiling at this realization, not with triumph, but with tenderness. Because part of the empath's evolution is forgiving the younger self who chased love out of longing, out of innocence, out of the belief that being needed was the same as being valued. You begin to understand why you walked that path. You see the beauty in her devotion, even if it led her into heartbreak. You feel compassion for her hopefulness. She wanted connection not from a place of weakness, but from the ancient memory of the soul that knows it was never meant to walk alone. But now you are different. You no longer seek completion, you seek resonance. Love, for you, becomes a meeting of equals, two sovereign beings standing before each other, offering not the fragments of themselves, but the whole. A connection where presence replaces pursuit, where clarity replaces confusion, where reciprocity replaces longing. And perhaps most profoundly, you begin to realize that the love you once chased was always meant to arise within you first. You feel a warmth growing beneath your ribs, not passion, not excitement, but something quieter, deeper, more enduring, a sense of home, a sense of arrival, a sense of being held by your own consciousness in a way no external figure ever could. This is the day the empathic woman stops chasing love. And this is why everything reverses. Because the world must rearrange itself around a woman who has remembered her worth. Because life cannot continue treating you as someone who abandons herself once you no longer do. Because love cannot flee from a heart that no longer chases but simply radiates. This is your turning point. This is your individuation. This is the night sea journey that led you back to your own shore. And now, as the tide settles, you stand not as a seeker, but as a source. The empath woman who has stopped chasing love does not become hardened, she becomes whole. She does not become cold, she becomes clear. She does not become distant, she becomes divine in her stillness. And the world slowly, inevitably, unfailingly responds not to her longing, but to her becoming. The day you stopped chasing love was not the end of anything. It was the beginning of everything.